My parents kicked me out at 17 because I wouldn't hand over my college fund to my jobless older brother. Now, a decade later, they're begging me for money because he got their business partner's daughter pregnant and then ghosted her. The last time I saw my father's face, it was contorted with rage as he threw my suitcase onto the front lawn, screaming that I was a selfish, ungrateful leech who would die alone and broke. That was 10 years ago. I was 17. My name is Alex, and for most of my life, I was the invisible member of the Harrison family. My parents, Richard and Patricia, had a clear, unspoken hierarchy in their minds. At the very top, perched on a throne of unwavering adoration, was my older brother, Daniel. Daniel was 2 years older than me, charismatic in a slick, used car salesman kind of way, and possessed an almost supernatural ability to never be held accountable for anything. If he broke a window playing baseball, it was because I hadn't got him his glove fast enough. If he failed a class, it was the teacher's fault for not understanding his unique learning style. If he crashed a family car, well, the roads were just icy, and really, why hadn't our parents bought him a car with better traction? I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who got a part-time job at 16 to pay for my own clothes and school supplies because my parents were too busy funneling their disposable income into Daniel's hobbies, which ranged from an ill-fated attempt at becoming a DJ, expensive speakers purchased, used twice, to a brief, disastrous foray into amateur car racing, membership fees, tires, and a hefty fine for street racing, all paid for by Mom and Dad. I learned early on that asking for help was a waste of breath. The answer was always a variation of, "We're helping your brother get on his feet right now," or, "Daniel has a lot of potential, he just needs the right opportunities." Daniel, at 20, had flunked out of 2 community colleges and was currently managing a friend's failing vape shop, which basically meant he sat behind the counter playing on his phone all day. The catalyst for my exile, however, was not a typical family squabble. It was a ghost from the past. My grandmother, Eleanor, my grandmother on my mother's side, was the polar opposite of my parents. She was a stern, practical woman who had built a small but successful real estate portfolio from nothing. She saw the world in black and white, and she saw the favoritism in our household with painful clarity. She and I had a quiet bond. I would spend weekends at her small, impeccably kept house, helping her in the garden or just listening to her stories about the past. She never said a bad word about my parents in front of me, but I could feel her disapproval in the way her lips would tighten whenever Daniel's name came up. When I was 15, my grandmother passed away. It was a devastating blow. She was the one stable, loving presence in my life. At her funeral, my parents were more concerned with the reading of the will than with grief. They were convinced she had left them a significant amount of money, perhaps even the house. They were wrong. The will was read a few weeks later. My grandmother, in her infinite wisdom, had left her entire estate in a carefully structured trust. The house and a portion of the liquid assets were to be sold, and the proceeds, along with the rest of her investments, were placed in a fund that was to be held until my 18th birthday. I was the sole beneficiary. The lawyer, a kind, elderly man who had been my grandmother's friend, explained that she wanted me to have a secure start in life, to pay for my education, and to have a safety net that my parents couldn't touch. The look on my parents' faces was something I will never forget. It was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and then, slowly, a cold, simmering resentment. For 2 years, the trust fund was a silent, poisonous presence in the house. They never mentioned it directly, but I could feel in the way they looked at me. I was no longer just an invisible child. I was a custodian of something they felt entitled to. They saw it not as my grandmother's gift to me, but as a family resource that was being selfishly withheld. Daniel, of course, was oblivious. He was too busy with his latest scheme, which involved convincing our parents to co-sign a loan for a food truck that he was going to run with his friends. The food truck, predictably, lasted for a month before it was repossessed, leaving my parents with a mountain of debt. The explosion came on a humid August evening, just 2 weeks before my 18th birthday, which also marked the date the trust fund would become accessible to me. I had just gotten home from my shift at a local bookstore. Daniel was out, probably with his friends, spending money he didn't have. My parents were sitting at the kitchen table, their faces grim. My father gestured for me to sit. "We need to talk about your grandmother's money," he began, not bothering with a preamble. I felt my stomach clench. "It's a trust fund for my education," I said, my voice calm, even though my heart was hammering. "That's what Grandma wanted." "Your grandmother is gone," my mother said, her voice thin and reedy. "We're the ones who are here. We're the ones who have raised you, fed you, clothed you for 18 years. And I'm grateful," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But this money, it was her last gift to me. It's for my future." "Your future?" my father scoffed. "What future? You're going to waste it on some fancy college?" "Daniel needs this money now. He has a real opportunity to get his life on track. He wants to open a proper auto detailing business. He's found a great location, but he needs capital." Of course, it was always about Daniel. "He can get a loan from a bank like everyone else." I said, "The money isn't for him. It's for me." "And you think you deserve it more than he does?" my mother snapped, her usual passive demeanor cracking. "Daniel has struggled. He needs a leg up. You've always been so independent, so self-sufficient. You don't need it like he does." The sheer, illogical absurdity of her statement left me speechless for a moment. I was being punished for being responsible? That doesn't even make sense. I finally managed. "Grandma left it to me, not to you and not to Daniel. It's mine. It's family money," my father roared, slamming his fist on the table. "And in this family, we help each other. You're being incredibly selfish. You're going to watch your own brother drown while you sit on a pile of cash." The fight that ensued was brutal. It went on for hours. They tried guilt, manipulation, and outright threats. They brought up every meal they'd ever bought me, every roof they'd ever put over my head. They accused me of being cold, heartless, and poisoned against them by my grandmother. Through it all, I held my ground. I was terrified, but a deep, stubborn part of me, the part that was my grandmother's legacy, refused to bend. I was not going to fund Daniel's latest doomed venture. I was not going to sacrifice my future for his perpetual adolescence. Finally, my father stood up, his face pale with fury. "If you're not going to be a part of this family," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "then you're not going to live in this family's house." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "What?" "You heard me. You want to keep that money for yourself. Fine. But you don't get to live under my roof, eat my food, and use my electricity while you do it. You want to be an adult and make your own decisions? Then you can be an adult and get the hell out." My mother didn't say a word. She just looked down at the table, her silence giving him all the permission he needed. I looked from one to the other, searching for a flicker of hesitation, of love, of anything. There was nothing. In that moment, I saw them for who they truly were. Two people so blinded by their devotion to their golden child that they were willing to throw their other child out onto the street. Without another word, I went up to my room, packed everything I could fit into 2 large suitcases and a backpack. I called my best friend Jake, whose family lived a few towns over. His mom answered, and in a shaky voice, I asked if I could stay for a while. She didn't ask any questions. She just said, "Of course, honey. Get in a cab. We'll be waiting." As I dragged my suitcases down the stairs and out the front door, my father stood on the porch, arms crossed. He didn't offer to help. He didn't say goodbye. As I walked down the driveway, he hurled one last insult after me. You'll be back. You'll come crawling back when you realize how hard the real world is. And don't expect us to be there for you. I never looked back. The next 10 years were a crucible. I spent the first few months at Jake's, working double shifts at a diner, and then at the bookstore. On my 18th birthday, I went to the bank and accessed my trust fund. Seeing the number on the screen was surreal. It wasn't a life-changing fortune, but it was enough. Enough for a down payment on a reliable used car, enough for a security deposit on a tiny studio apartment, and enough for tuition at the state college. I worked my way through school. There were times when I was so exhausted I thought I would collapse. There were times when I couldn't afford to eat anything but ramen noodles for weeks. There were times when the loneliness was a physical ache, a hollow space in my chest where a family should have been. I saw them at a cousin's wedding about 2 years after I left. They were on the other side of the room, and when they saw me, they looked right through me as if I were a ghost. Daniel, tan and grinning, had a new expensive watch on his wrist. My parents hovered around him, beaming. I felt a sharp, familiar pain, but I also felt something else, a strange sense of freedom. They had no power over me anymore. I graduated with a degree in computer science and a minor in business. I got a job at a mid-sized tech firm, worked my way up, and then 5 years ago, I took a leap of faith. I had an idea for a software platform, a project management tool designed for small, creative teams. I built a prototype, pitched it to a few angel investors, and one of them took a chance on me. The company, which I named Eleanor Tech in honor of my grandmother, grew slowly at first, then explosively. We now have offices in 3 cities, a staff of over 100 passionate people, and a valuation that still makes my head spin when I think about it. I have a beautiful apartment, a group of incredible friends who have become my chosen family, and a peace I never thought I'd find. I had no contact with my family of origin for 10 years. I heard rumors, of course. My cousin Mia, the only one from that side who ever bothered to stay in touch, would occasionally give me updates, though she knew I didn't really want them. I heard that Daniel's auto detailing business, funded by my parents' second mortgage, had folded within a year. I heard he'd gone through a string of girlfriends and jobs. I heard my parents' business, a small printing shop they'd sunk their remaining money into, was struggling to compete in the digital age. I felt a twinge of something. Not satisfaction, not pity, just a vague sense of distance. It was like hearing about the struggles of people I used to know in a past life. The first crack in the silence came 6 months ago. It was a late Tuesday evening, and I was in my home office, reviewing quarterly projections. My personal phone, a number I'd had for years and rarely gave out, buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe the screen. Hello. There was a pause, then a hesitant, familiar voice. Alex? Alex, is it you? It was my mother. My heart didn't skip a beat. It didn't race. It just stayed steady. Yes, it's me. Oh, Alex, she breathed, and I could hear the tears in her voice. Oh, thank God. I've been trying to find a way to reach you for so long. Your number was changed, and please, don't hang up. I leaned back in my chair, my expression calm. What do you want, Mom? I need to talk to you. It's about your father. It's about Daniel. Everything is falling apart, and we don't know what to do. We need your help. Of course they did. I'm listening. What she told me over the next 20 minutes was a masterpiece of self-inflicted tragedy. It involved Daniel, of course, and a new, spectacularly destructive scheme. It started about a year ago. Daniel, now in his early 30s and still adrift, had managed to charm a woman named Isabel. She was beautiful, successful, and came from a wealthy family. Her father, Gerald, was a big player in commercial real estate. To my parents, this wasn't just a girlfriend for Daniel. It was a lifeline. They saw dollar signs. They encouraged the relationship with a fervor they'd never shown for anything else. Daniel, for his part, played the part of the charming, slightly aimless, but ultimately good-hearted boyfriend perfectly. He hid his job history, his failed ventures, his utter lack of ambition. Isabel fell for him. Hard. They got engaged 6 months ago in a lavish ceremony paid for by her father, who, despite his reservations about Daniel's lack of career, was willing to give him a chance for his daughter's sake. And here's where my parents' scheme came into play. My parents' printing business was on its last legs. They were drowning in debt and facing bankruptcy. They saw Gerald, Isabel's father, as their white knight. They concocted a plan. They would propose a strategic partnership. They would convince Gerald to invest a substantial sum into their business, modernizing their equipment and expanding their marketing. In return, they would finally bring Daniel into the fold, making him a partner and grooming him to take over. It was a neat little package. Gerald's money would save them, and would give his future son-in-law a respectable, stable career. It was a win-win in their minds. They pitched the idea to Gerald a few months ago. To their astonishment, he was receptive. He wasn't a fool. He did his due diligence. But my parents are good salespeople when they need to be. They painted a picture of a generational family business that just needed a little modernizing. They swore on their lives that Daniel was ready to settle down and commit. Gerald, wanting to believe in his daughter's happiness, agreed in principle. He didn't write a check immediately, but he gave them a verbal commitment. He said he would have his lawyers draw up the papers and finalize the investment in 30 days. My parents, in their arrogance and desperation, saw that verbal agreement as a done deal. They immediately took out a massive bridge loan against their already mortgaged house, using the promise of Gerald's investment as collateral. They spent the money on new, expensive printing presses, a flashy new website, and a marketing campaign. They were counting on Gerald's money to pay back the loan. Then, the house of cards collapsed. 2 weeks ago, Isabel discovered Daniel's secret. It wasn't just one secret. It was a Pandora's box of them. She found an old phone of his that he'd forgotten to wipe. On it were messages, photos, and videos spanning their entire relationship. He had been cheating on her consistently from the very beginning. There were women from his past, women he met in bars, women he connected with on dating apps. He had a whole other life, a sordid, secret life that he had been leading while playing a devoted fiancée. And the final, devastating blow. One of those women, a brief fling from 6 months ago, was pregnant, and she was threatening to go public. Isabel was, of course, devastated. She broke off the engagement immediately and told her father everything. The investment was dead. Gerald, furious at being manipulated and at the pain caused his daughter, not only pulled the plug, but also made it known in his extensive business network that my parents and their son were not to be trusted. The bridge loan was now due. My parents had no way to pay it, and their business, saddled with new debt and useless new equipment, was effectively worthless. They were facing bankruptcy and the loss of their home. And Daniel, when confronted, he didn't apologize or try to make amends. He threw a tantrum, blamed Isabel for being too trusting, and then, when my parents begged him to go to her, to get on his knees and do whatever it took to salvage the situation, he told them to go to hell. He packed a bag and moved in with one of his friends, leaving my parents to deal with the wreckage alone. So you see, Alex, my mother finished, her voice cracking. We have nothing. We're going to lose everything. And your father is a broken man. He won't eat. He won't talk. He just sits and stares. We don't know what to do. We need help. We need money. Just a loan to get us through this. You're our only hope." I listened to the entire story without interrupting. When she was done, there was a long silence. I felt an overwhelming sense of not satisfaction, not even pity. It was a profound weariness. It was the exhaustion of carrying the weight of their rejection for so long, only to be called upon the moment they needed something. They hadn't reached out to apologize for throwing me out. They hadn't reached out to ask how I was, to celebrate my graduation, to acknowledge my success. They had only reached out because their golden boy had failed them, and they needed a new piggy bank. "Mom," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "I'm sorry for what you're going through. It sounds awful, but I can't help you." "But, Alex, you have to," she cried. "We're your parents. We raised you. This is your family. You stopped being my family the night you watched Dad throw me out onto the street." I said, "You didn't raise me after that. I raised myself. I built my life from nothing, with no help from you. You made your choice 10 years ago. You chose Daniel. You've been choosing him for 30 years. This isn't my mess. It's yours. It's Daniel's. You need to clean it up yourselves." "How can you be so cold?" she sobbed. "How can you be so heartless?" "I'm not being cold, Mom. I'm being honest. The bank isn't going to care that you're sad. The creditors aren't going to be moved by tears. You made a series of terrible, irresponsible financial decisions based on a lie, and now you have to face the consequences. Just like I had to face the consequences of your decision to kick me out. It was hard for me. This will be hard for you. That's life. You owe us," she whispered, a hint of the old venom creeping into her voice. "You owe us for everything." "I owe you nothing," I replied and hung up. I knew that wouldn't be the end of it. Within hours, my phone began blowing up. Texts and calls from relatives I hadn't spoken to in a decade. My father's sister, my Aunt Brenda, who had always doted on Daniel, left a voicemail calling me a miserable, ungrateful brat and telling me that blood is thicker than water. My mother's brother, Uncle Paul, sent a long, rambling text about family loyalty and how I needed to be the bigger person. A few of my more distant cousins sent messages that were more pleading than angry, telling me that my parents were truly desperate and that I was their only hope. I ignored them all. I blocked the most aggressive ones. I felt a familiar pressure, the same pressure I had felt at 17, the weight of their expectations and their attempt at guilt. But I was not 17 anymore. I was a 30-year-old man who had built an empire from the ashes of his childhood. Their opinions, their judgments, their pleas were like pebbles thrown at a fortress. Mia, my cousin, called me a few days later. She was the only one I picked up for. "Hey," she said, her voice cautious. "I'm guessing you're getting roasted by the family group chat." "Something like that," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "It's like 2014 all over again." "I just wanted you to know that I'm on your side," she said. "I think what's happening to them is awful, but it's not your fault. They made their bed, and the way they're all attacking you now just proves they haven't changed. They don't see you as a son or a brother. They see you as a wallet." "Thanks, Mia. That means a lot. Just be careful. I heard my mom talking to your mom. They're getting desperate, and desperate people do stupid things." She was right. A week after my mother's call, I was leaving my office building when I saw him. My father. He was standing by the entrance to the parking garage, looking smaller and older than I remembered. His clothes were wrinkled. His face was pale and gaunt, and his eyes had a hollow, defeated look. He was the opposite of the imposing, furious man who had stood on our porch a decade ago. He saw me and straightened up slightly. "Alex." I stopped a few feet away from him, my body tense. "Dad." He shuffled forward. I came to talk to you. In person. Your mother said you wouldn't listen on the phone. She was right. He nodded, as if he expected that. I know I don't have any right to ask you for anything. I know that, but I'm asking anyway. We're losing the house. The bank is going to foreclose. We have nowhere to go. We're going to be on the street. Alex, on the street. I looked at him. For a moment, a flicker of the old pain, the old longing for his approval, stirred in my chest. I squashed it. I'm sorry to hear that. It must be terrifying. Please, he said, his voice cracking. A loan, just enough to cover the mortgage for a few months, to give us time to figure something out. We'll pay you back. I swear we will. You swore a lot of things over the years, Dad. You swore you loved me and Daniel equally. You swore you would always be there for me. Those were lies. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. I was wrong. I was a terrible father. To you. I know that now. I see it. Daniel, he's not who we thought he was. He's a selfish, lying coward. He's abandoned us. He won't even take our calls. You were the one who was always strong, always responsible. We didn't see it. So now that your preferred child has failed you, you're willing to settle for the backup? I asked, my voice cold. I'm not a consolation prize, Dad. I'm not a plan B. I was your son long before Daniel screwed up, and you threw me away like garbage. You don't get to come back now just because your golden boy turned out to be made of clay. Tears welled up in his eyes. Actual tears. I'm not here because of Daniel. I'm here because I'm your father, and I'm desperate. I'm here to apologize, to tell you I was wrong, that I'm so sorry for everything. It's too late for apologies, I said. An apology doesn't erase 10 years of silence. An apology doesn't pay for therapy I needed to get over the fact that my parents didn't want me. An apology doesn't build a life. I did that. Alone. You had nothing to do with it. And you don't get to share in it now. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. I'm not going to give you money. I'm not going to save you. You need to save yourselves. Sell the business. Sell the house. Declare bankruptcy. Whatever you have to do. It will be hard. It will be humiliating. But that's the consequence of the choices you made. You taught me that actions have consequences. I learned that lesson well. Now it's your turn. I stepped around him and walked toward my car. I heard him call my name once, a broken, pathetic sound. I didn't turn around. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I just felt free. The last tether, the last faint hope that they might one day see me, had finally snapped, and it was a relief. In the weeks that followed, the calls and the flying monkeys intensified for a while, then gradually tapered off. I heard from Mia that my parents had indeed lost their house. They were living in a small, rented apartment in a less desirable part of town. My father had gotten a job as a greeter at a big box store. My mother was working part-time at a pharmacy. The business was gone, sold for pennies on the dollar to pay off a fraction of their debt. Daniel had apparently resurfaced, but he wasn't living with them. He was couch surfing with friends, still jobless, and had become a pariah in his social circle after the news of his cheating and the pregnancy got out. The other woman, I heard, had decided to keep the baby and was seeking child support. Daniel was ignoring the legal notices. I felt nothing, not schadenfreude, not pity, just a profound sense of detachment. They were characters in a story I had stopped reading a long time ago. Last week, I received a letter in the mail. It was from my mother. The handwriting was shaky. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a plea for money this time. It was short. Alex, we saw a picture of you in a business magazine. You look so happy, so successful. We are so proud of you. We always were, even if we never said it. We're sorry we were too blind to see it. We're sorry for everything. We don't expect you to forgive us. We just wanted you to know. Mom and Dad, I read it 3 times. I waited for the tears, for the anger, for the catharsis. None came. I felt a small, quiet ache, a ghost of the pain I had carried for so long. But it was distant, muffled. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer in my home office, the one where I keep keepsakes, not as a token of reconciliation, but as a final closing note on a chapter of my life that was now well and truly over. They were proud of me now, from a distance, now that it was safe, now that they had nothing to gain. It was a bittersweet epilogue, but an epilogue nonetheless. I had my life, my company, my chosen family. I had built a world where I was the priority, and that was enough. My grandmother had given me the key, but I was the one who had opened the door.